Biden promised ISIS-K will pay. Having no U.S. troops in Afghanistan makes that harder. The U.S. relied in part on overhead surveillance imagery to target the suspected ISIS-K fighters, according to two U.S. officials. The detailed intelligence picture that officials say the military was able to build in the final hours leading up to the strike offer a window into how the U.S. military has conducted counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan for years. But current and former officials say that with no U.S. troops left on the ground, gathering intelligence is about to become infinitely more difficult. And two officials who had seen U.S. surveillance imagery in the aftermath of the strike confirmed official statements that there were large secondary explosions, indicating the presence of the explosives in the vehicle trunk, which these officials suggested may have caused the deaths of the nearby civilians. Astronomically high number of civilian deaths. 10 civilian deaths is an astronomically high number, according to a U.S. official with direct knowledge of the standards for a strike of this nature, who added that the military would have conducted collateral damage estimates beforehand. Had we cooperation with any local partner, we would have never fired a missile at the vehicle but tried to get to the drivers before they got in the car, said one former intelligence official with knowledge of how these strikes are carried out. That assumes we had intel on the car as opposed to the people, and maybe after it was already en route, which leaves far fewer options. There is an expectation that our technology will allow this offshore reach for insight and disruption, which is just not how it's going to play out, the former official added. We have to have eyes on the ground either by proxy or through and then a local partner to take action, other than require us to send in missiles or commandos. Biden has promised to continue U.S. strikes on ISIS-K militants in Afghanistan, vowing to make them pay for the attack on Kabul airport last week that killed 13 U.S. service members and scores of Afghans trying to flee the country. But with the U.S.-backed Afghan government in exile and the Taliban now effectively in charge of the entire country, retaining visibility into terrorist groups like ISIS-K will be more difficult, current and former officials say. Even though the U.S. can continue to fly surveillance drones over Afghanistan, because they will be launched from Gulf countries, the drones will spend as much as 60% of their flight time just getting to and from Afghanistan, limiting the amount of coverage that they can provide inside the country. That creates blind spots, multiple current and former officials said. And without a network of human sources that the United States built up over 20 years, intelligence and military officials might not know where to task the drones to look. You can have the most sophisticated air, but if you don't have the information it doesn't matter, said one former intelligence official. You have to know there's a threat, then you have to know who is involved and identify them and say, where are they going to be and when. As a result, the Biden administration is grappling with whether some form of loosely defined diplomatic and counterterrorism relationship with the Taliban might be necessary. Hard choices the administration is now actively discussing, internally and with international allies, whether and how to open diplomatic relations with the Taliban, according to two other U.S. officials. That decision will in turn impact the future of U.S. counterterrorism operations in the country. Over the last several days and weeks, officials have been weighing hard policy questions like whether to release funds to the Taliban and who might serve as the main interlocutor to a group that was once a sworn enemy of the United States. How much intelligence to share with the Taliban in an attempt to thwart terrorist attacks has been a subject of ongoing debate since the evacuation operation began, and continues to loom over the policy discussions, officials said. Adding to the challenge is the fact that the administration believed it would have much more time to make these decisions. For months, the Biden administration has been reviewing its policy for conducting drone strikes against terrorists in countries that are not active war zones. The drone strike review had been nearing completion, sources familiar with the process said, but the unexpectedly swift rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan has complicated matters. While the Taliban agreed to coordinate safe passage for Americans and some Afghans to Kabul airport during the evacuation, the administration is not betting on the militant group becoming a reliable counterterrorism partner. It's possible, Milley said Wednesday when asked if the US will seek to coordinate strikes on ISIS-K with the Taliban going forward. But both he and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin expressed deep skepticism, with Austin telling reporters that the limited coordination during the evacuation should not be seen as a model for the future. "I would not make any leaps of logic to broader issues," he said. Even during the evacuation mission, the US kept the Taliban at arm's length. While the US did share some intelligence with the militants to help thwart potential terrorist attacks on the airport, it was extremely limited in scope and offered only to ensure the safety of US troops. According to one US official, the US also did not receive any usable intelligence from the Taliban, this person said, as the Pentagon and intelligence agencies conducted counterterrorism operations on the ground in Kabul to try to thwart potential attacks by ISIS-K. A fool's errand. The deal struck between former President Donald Trump's administration and the Taliban in February 2020 required that in exchange for a US withdrawal, the Taliban would sever ties with al-Qaeda and work to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for it and other terrorist groups like ISIS-K to launch attacks against the United States. That agreement is now informing how the US is thinking about its future diplomatic and counterterrorism relationship with the group, according to a US official familiar with the ongoing deliberations. Theoretically, both the US and the Taliban have an incentive to work together in certain instances to prevent terrorists from regrouping in Afghanistan. But current and former officials say the situation is much more complex and fluid in practice. People slide back and forth among the different organizations, Bolton added. So trusting the Taliban with sensitive information that's not just interesting when you give it to them but shows sources and methods and potentially shows doctrine exposes us to more danger later. I think it's a fool's errand to think that you can work with the Taliban against ISIS-K.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.